Before we conclude the topic about console testers, I would like to go over two more examples with you. One of them, the first one, is an exercise. Let's now see what the exercise question is, and then you can pause the video and think about it. So can this alternative version 2 to console tester 2 work without nested try and catch? Let's see what it looks like. And before that, you may want to revisit about the console tester 2 that we originally had, right? So the console tester 2, we got outer try and catch, and also the inner try and catch over here, right? And then, so they can print out 3 different messages. 2 of them are error messages. 1 of them is the success message. We spoke about them in complete details in the earlier part of the module. If you got any doubts, you should really clarify first by revisiting them before you go on with the exercise, okay? Let's see what this alternative version would look like. So we still try to set up a counter with its initial value. This part is the same. And then we simply got try and catch over here without being nested over here, okay? And then we just got another try and catch over here without being nested, right? You can see we got 2 try and catch blocks, one after another, as opposed to being nested over here. But let me show you some correspondence quickly, okay? So you will see how to you can get some insight about thinking the exercise solution. So the first try and catch block in the alternative version over here, you can see is meant to print out the error value too large, exception thrown unexpectedly. So that one actually corresponds to the outer catch block, right? You can see the error message here. So you can think about the first try and catch block is really about this. It's going to correspond to this part over here, right? Up to here, right before the inner catch block. Right before the inner try block, and then this part over here. And it might print out error, value too large, exception thrown unexpectedly, right? And then what about the second try and catch block in the alternative version? That one there might print out either error, value too large, exception not thrown, or success, value, exception thrown, right? Value too large, exception thrown. And that one there really corresponds to, let me use a different color. Let me use blue over here. Corresponding to the inner try and catch block over here, right? Either error or the success. So that's how you can consider the difference, the structural differences between the two versions of console tester 2, okay? But we know already very well from the previous module, from the previous part of the module, that this original version here works. And we also saw on the paper, and also on the Eclipse. So here's my question. Will this alternative version work? As we discussed before. Pause the video, think about it. If it works, why? If it does not work, why not? All right, assuming that you thought about it, the answer is this alternative version without nesting the try and catch block will not work. Okay? If you want to get a little bit hints without knowing the precise answer, let me give you a little bit hints. Okay? Let me go back to my iPad. So this is the alternative version. One try and catch, followed by another try and catch. So here's my hints to you. What if one of the first 3 increments, either this, or this, or this, if somehow they really mistakenly throws a value too large exception prematurely? Consider what's going to happen if either this, or this, or this throws the premature value too large exception from them, which is incorrect. In that case, is the tester really going to execute in a flow that makes sense? That's my hints. Pause the video and think about it further if you want. All right, assuming that you thought about it, let's now go over this. Go with this line of thoughts by the hints. Let's say, for example, hypothetically, let's say somehow this particular theta increments is going to throw. Let's assume. Let's say that one is going to throw the value too large exception prematurely. Let's say that happens. So that means we're going to be, the execution flow is going to be disrupted, and then we'll simply bypass this, bypass that, the rest of the try block, and then we'll go just to the catch block over here. If we go to the catch block, this will be called properly, and then we're going to print out the error. So far, it is actually okay. But remember the principle or philosophy that we talk about for error handling in the earlier module, where we talk about exceptions, is whenever if the error happens, we really want to let the execution flow just be disrupted and just break without going any further computation on the model objects, in this case the counter objects. But is this tester obeying that principle? It seems like not, because after this we are finishing off, we basically have finished the try and catch block over here. But there's nothing that will stop the caller, which will be the main method over here, to proceed with the try and catch block over here. In that case, it might still actually increments the counter value maybe by 1 or maybe or not, right? So that's it simply doesn't really satisfy the principle. So here, this manipulations of the counter or model objects will still proceed as if there was no error occurring beforehand, which is clearly not the case, because in this case we are assuming that this particular CDA increments is actually going to be implemented incorrectly, so it will throw the value to large exception prematurely, meaning that we have already printed out this message to the console indicating to the user that there's some error that has happened already, but we are still proceeding to incrementing further, so that's definitely not. So this version here is actually not correct. All right. As a recap, we are presenting this alternative version of the console test 2 by simply using try and catch block, another try and catch block without being nested, and the resulting execution flow at the runtime, if there's any error occurring, for example from here, is going to be nonsensical. It's simply not right, because as soon as any error that actually has happened, we should not proceed with any further manipulation of the counter or model objects. In this case, we will actually go here, which is not right. Okay, so that's about the exercise I want you to do together with you. Let's now see one more example, which is about how we can make so the console tester, you can see each tester so far, console tester 1, console tester 2, they only test a particular scenario. In one scenario, we just want to decrements from when the value is actually 0. In the other scenario, test case, we try to increments when the counter value is already 3, but only 2. Is it possible to make the console tester more like a richer, so that we can actually test more in a single console tester? The answer is yes, it is possible. But you can definitely actually go over the points about the exercise that's basically more concise description of what I just explained to you. But you should really know the detailed version as well. And when later you try to do the do your study for the lecture slides, you should also click on this hyperlink over here and go to look at the corresponding JUnit test case. In the JUnit test case, either you try to serialize the try and catch block, or you try to nest them. Either way is going to work for the JUnit test cases, but eventually you're going to learn about how. So that'll be one of the later exercises I want to do together with you as well. So when you study this example here, you want to see that correspondence as well. Okay. Let's take a look at the final example for console tester. Let's say we got console tester 3. And what I want to show you, the logic is pretty simple. I just want to highlight a few things, maybe on the iPad quickly. Okay, and then I'll show you on the Eclipse how you can play with it. Okay, so this is console tester 3, also console application, and then we're using scanner, to read the inputs. Let's see this. What I want to highlight first, you can see we initialize some counter objects over here, and inside the try and catch block, we try to either call increments or decrements or CDA get value. And to know which one we should really call depends on what the user enters as a command. So you can see here we got the command from the user is actually going to be some string we read from them from the keyboard. So it can be either increments, can be decrements, can be value, right? And then notice that we actually got multiple catch block, which we spoke about in the earlier module, right? So either it can be value to large exception, or it could be value to small exception, right? So either one, right? It's going to be printed out to the console accordingly. And then we also try to use a Boolean variable over here called user wants to continue. Initially, it's simply just true, meaning that we are able to go into the while loop for at least once, for the very first, okay, for the very first time. And then when will we be able to exit from the loop? That's really important. So user wants to continue will be set to false when none of the valid commands for either increments or decrements or getting the value for the counter is entered from the user. So if the user enter any string other than this or this or this, we're going to go to the else part and then set the user wants to continue to be false, so that when we go back to the loop over here, it's going to be false. So that means we're going to exit from the loop, right? So it's a very small piece of code, but I think again it illustrates about just another application of using exception handling and also with the loops, right? I'll leave that the detail to you. Let me illustrate to you how that can be run quickly. Then let me now go back to the Eclipse, and then you can see under console testers, you will see console tester number 3. Okay, if you double click on that, and then I will simply right click on that and say run as Java application. Okay, like that. Okay, let me maximize it. Well, of course, if I enter anything other than increment, decrement, or value, for example, if I say exit, you'll simply say bye, and then I'm done, right? Let me just launch it again. And then if I say, what's the current value for the counter? 0. It's just initialized. If I try to decrement from 0, that's what the console tester 1 does. And then it's going to say value too small. And specifically, you should really do the tracing yourself. What I just did was, I tried to do decrements when the counter value was the initial value 0. In that case, what I expected to, what's really happening is, this execution flow will be disrupted, and simply go to the value too small exception. All right, that's something very important for you to see. Okay, and then let me just check one more thing. So far it's very good, but I just want to make sure. Let me just stop the console application. You also want to make sure the counter, because we changed the implementation to be something that's incorrect earlier, right? Let me just change it back. Otherwise, I cannot demonstrate the behavior correctly for you. Okay, let me just do it again. Of course, following the same logic as discussed before, you can also try to modify the implementation for either increments or decrement to be incorrect, and then you will see the corresponding error message from the console, from the iterative console tester as well. I'll leave that exercise to you. All right, let me just go back to console tester 3. Let me just give you a few more examples. Okay, value initially 0. If I do decrements, value too small. If I do increments, value incremented to 1. Increment again, value is 2. Increment again, value is 3. Okay, now if I try to do, let's say, increments again, and I just fix the implementation of increment to be correct. So that means it's going to say value too big. So this means what happened was, when I try to execute the increments over here, the value too large exception was thrown as expected. So that means I'm going to go into this particular catch block over here and say value too big. That's actually what happened. Okay. All right. Of course, you can modify the implementation to be incorrect, and then you will see the error message as well. Okay. Let me go back to Eclipse. Okay, and then I can say increment again like that. Okay, value too big, and then value is simply just 3. It was never incremented to 4. Okay, I can say exit. You know what? Why don't I just do it for completeness? Let me show to you. Let's go back to the counter class, okay, over here, and then let's go to the increment method. Okay, currently it is correct. Let's say it was incorrect. Let's use the version number 2 that we spoke about before, right? In this case, the expected value too large exception when we try to increment from 3 to 4 will not be thrown mistakenly, right? So now let's go back to the console tester 3. Let's launch the tester again. And in this case, the incorrect implementation is going to be revealed for its error by the tester, which is really the purpose for having this tester. Let's now try to launch it. And then let me maximize it. Okay, let me go directly to increments, and the value is 3 over here. Okay. And then if I try to increment again, the expected behavior should be that we got a value too big, too large exception thrown. But since we already modified the implementation to be incorrect, it's not going to be thrown anymore. So when we say that, you see no exception has been thrown. So if I say value is now 4, so this is totally unacceptable. So, but we have to judge this by using our eyes and also to look at that manually to really look at, okay, up to this point we know that the implementation is actually not correct. Before I end the current video, I'd like to make one important point to all of us about console testers in general. Let me just go back to the package explorer view. If you look at console tester 1 and console tester 2, each one of them only tests for one aspects for the counter, one usage pattern. So for example, usage pattern for console tester 1 is about when you try to decrement when the value is 0. And for console tester 2, it's simply just another single aspects where you're trying to increment when the value already reaches its maximum. Only two aspects we can test from console tester 1 and console tester 2 all together. And for console tester 3, it's a huge improvement because we can try to test maybe various usage patterns for the counter by using a loop, as we just saw. However, the way we actually do for each aspect is about running in the following way. We have to type from the keyboard inputs to the console tester, and we have to examine the actual output from the console tester by our eyes. So the entire process is so manual. Whenever you're doing something that's manual, it might be okay for small scale applications. But whenever you want to get to the more complicated and large scale application, manual way of testing is definitely not the way to go because it's so tedious and hence very error prone. So that's something we definitely want to address by using something that's much more appropriate, which is called automated unit testing using JUnits.